Uh, well, I just want to welcome everybody to this incredible Thrive Talk tonight. I'm Steve Parker. I'm chair of the Program Development Committee at Thrive. Thrive is the Community Mental Health Center here in Oak Park. This series has been bringing interesting topics of importance to our community for the last 4 years. And like all Thrive Talks, tonight will be recorded and it will be available in the video library on the Thrive Counseling Center website. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to encourage you to post questions in the chat room and to post them so that everyone can see what's being asked. So just post it to everybody, please. We will certainly do our best to address as many questions as possible. Like I said before, the intention of all Thrive Talks is to offer relevant topics for the community, and tonight is absolutely no exception. The shifting gender landscape is all around us, and for many, it's very confusing. Tonight's talk will attempt to at least begin clarifying some of that confusion. We are very lucky to have Rick Smith talk to us about gender identity. One of the things that I really like about Rick is that he had no idea that he would become a therapist when he entered into his professional life. He chose this after having life experiences that he dealt with in ways that he knew would help others. And I can tell you that there's no graduate internship program that comes close to real life. And so Rick is now a family therapist. He's a father of 2 amazing kids, one of whom transitioned. He's a husband, and he's a really nice guy. Rick, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here tonight. So I want to just say to everybody that if it feels like I'm rushing through this, it's because I'm rushing through this. I probably have 50 minutes of material that I want to try to do in 45, which I would be happier if I could do in 40. I also want to put a caveat out there. I've been battling a bit of a technical issue on my end where Zoom seems to want to crash PowerPoint. I think I've sorted it, but if I haven't, I'm going to need everybody to just chill for a sec, let me reset and get things back up to the point at which it crashed. I'm hoping that's not the case. I think I have it sorted. So with that, let me launch into this presentation and share my screen. Here we go. All right, let's get started. All about gender, what every parent should know. I don't know, that's a kind of a presumptuous title. Maybe it's what every parent might want to know, maybe sort of, but that's what I'm going to try to do. Good evening, thanks for coming. The goal today is to cover as much information as possible about gender, but I plan to stay 100 feet up. I don't want to get bogged down in too many details, and yet details are very important here. Some of you may already know more about this than I do. Some of you may know nothing about this, and some of you may be living it. To be clear, I may not use terms you all agree with. I may not get a part of this right according to your opinions or your experience. And that's just a fact about this area. It's a constantly evolving area and it's changing every day. So forgive me in advance if I misspeak, if I misstep, or if I mischaracterize you or your loved one's experience in any way. Culture changes quickly and fluidly, and we all could do well to keep in mind that fact as we talk about gender tonight. Got a lot to cover. Let's make this a collective mind evening and let's get started. So I want to locate myself first because this is probably first and foremost a personal story for me. It's certainly why I'm speaking to you tonight. It's why I became a therapist. Meet my daughter Lena and my son Eli. Eli was 18 when he came out to me first as lesbian, then quickly thereafter as trans. He's now 29, living life as a socially transitioned female to male transsexual. Don't hiccup on the word transsexual. We'll talk about that later. And yes, he agreed to this. When Eli was a child, we, his parents, failed to see that he was different in important ways. What we saw was just that he was a kid who struggled with his sense of self. Over the years, there were suicide attempts, hospitalizations, self-harm, emotional, social, and academic struggles, bullying and assaults, hundreds of hours of seemingly pointless therapy before Eli himself realized that his difference was his gender identity. Only then was Eli, and we, his family alongside him, able to start the journey towards health. And this is why I have a passion to help my community of therapists, to help families, and to help the broader world understand this socially constructed disease. Make note of that term, socially constructed disease, better so that they can help the Elis of the world. So let's get into it. What is it? Concepts, terms, facts. Take a look at this illustration. It's clever. We have an umbrella that is a trans umbrella, and it's shielding what's underneath from the rain. The raindrops are cis raindrops. Cis, which is slang for cisgender. And underneath some of the many ways that trans people identify and are labeled. So here we go. Really important, foundational to this discussion. Definitions of sexuality, sex, and gender. Sexuality, a person's orientation or preference. She began to understand the power of his sexuality. The synonyms are sensuality, sexiness, and eroticism. That is not the same as sex, which could be sexual activity, including intercourse, but also is the two main categories that humans are divided into based on their reproductive organs. An example, he really enjoyed talking about her sex. See what I did there? And the synonyms are sexual intercourse, lovemaking, but more importantly for tonight, gender. Sex is how we used to characterize gender. Now the term gender is in typical use. The state of being male or female, used in medical, social, or cultural contexts. Because she had both ovarian and testicular tissue, they labeled his gender as intersex. I did it again. The use of gender versus sex started in the 50s. It's now pretty common. And yet, at a street level, at a day-to-day level, we're constantly using these terms interchangeably, and we're also confusing sexuality, sex, and gender. They are three different concepts in many ways. Let's continue on. Yet more terms. Why this long laundry list of stuff? Because language is incredibly important in this area. It is the one way that we define meaning. And so that meaning becomes very, very important. And if you're interested in this, or you are living this, or you are living with somebody that is living this, you need to understand some of these terms and many more. And your journey will take you there. So let's talk about vaginoplasty. That is the construction of a vagina using a penis. It's a multi-surgery process, and it's not undertaken lightly, and it's a rigorous process. Gender assignment is typically at birth. That is what the nurse in the delivery room looks at the baby and says, it's a boy, it's a girl. Gender atypical, which is inconsistent behavior to the assigned gender. So a boy acting like a girl. Metoidioplasty is the partial construction of a penis. Gender reassignment is to change one's gender, typically referring to the surgical. Phalloplasty, known on a street level as bottom surgery, is the construction of the penis in a female to male transition. Gender nonconforming is another umbrella term. It essentially means non-binary, but it can also be used to refer to the entire trans umbrella. Mastectomy, otherwise known as top surgery, which is the removal of breasts in a female to male transition. Gender identity, important, make note of this. Gender identity is how you feel. Not what they told you you are, but how you feel. And those two, and how you feel does not necessarily conform to the sexual characteristics that you have. So that's an important concept. Penectomy is the partial or full removal of a penis. Cisgender is when your birth gender is the same as your identity. Labeled a boy in the delivery room, identifies as a boy, as a child, teenager, man. Passing is living as your expressed gender, so your gender identity. And that could be male, male passing as female, female passing as male. Transgender is, again, the broad spectrum. You could see gender nonconforming used in the same way. Packing is to increase the appearance of a penis, much like stuffing a bra to increase the appearance of breasts or a padded bra. Transsexual is somebody who is in social transition. This term carries a lot of weight and negative connotations, but it is nonetheless an accurate term. Binding is to reduce the appearance of breasts. Usually it's a corset type of device, usually Velcro. It's rather uncomfortable, it constricts breathing, but it's really important to reduce the appearance of secondary sexual characteristics when they don't conform to your identity. Transvestite is cross-dressing. And then finally, we have androphilic and gynophilic, which is the gender that you are attracted to. And we have puberty blockers, which are medications that delay the onset of puberty. Why? Because there's distress for transgender people associated with the appearance of secondary sexual characteristics, body hair, breasts, so on and so forth. All right, enough terms. Let's go on. I want to talk about the landscape a little bit. And it's an interesting landscape. So let's start. In 2014, the 2013 census, Bosky in 2014 cited the 2013 census that said 1.5 to 6 million Americans identified as transgender. The agreed upon number is in that 1.5 million range, and that number now in the 2020 census is significantly higher. And we live in a world here in the US in which some surprising things have happened. Who among you would have said that in June of 2015, the Supreme Court would have ruled to legalize same-sex marriage? Nobody saw that one coming. It was rapid change. Society hasn't necessarily caught up to it, but there is the capacity for real change. 2/3 of Americans now define family to include gay and lesbian couples with kids. And yet, sex education in the United States almost never covers gender identity. We don't talk about that. That's locked. That's told to us in the delivery room or when we have ultrasound. And yet we know that sex is non-binary, because differences in sexual development occur 1 in every 1,500 times. That's a really significant number. Think about that for a second. And we know from research as well that gender self-awareness emerges between 18 and 24 months of age. Nobody would have guessed that. But the research makes it clear. Children are aware of their gender at that young of an age. And identity formation happens in stages. Sexual identity isn't linear. It can shift over time. And we don't think about it that way, but it's important to note that. Gender cognition in trans and non-conforming kids is the same as in their cisgender peers. They are just as capable of knowing their gender as their cisgender peers. And yet, the American public perceives trans kids as confused, delayed, and oppositional. And that last one is really important. Oppositional. Think of the list of terms that we talked about, the surgical transitions and the things that trans individuals go through to try to have their identity conform to their perception. And would we really believe that they do this because they're oppositional? That's a lot. And what it creates for trans individuals is some pretty scary numbers. Non-socially versus socially transitioned kids have a 3 times higher likelihood of having depression and anxiety. They score 3 times higher on those assessments. And in a very real way, the suicide rate, attempted suicide rate of female to male and male to female teens are scary. Female to male, 50.8%. Male to female, 29.9%. And yet, there's still reason for hope. Because our youth are way less invested in sexual orientation and monosexuality. And if you have kids today, you know this. They don't talk about it the same way. They don't care about it the same way. They look at gender as a spectrum, and they are capable of placing themselves on that spectrum, and they don't hesitate to move around. Now, it depends a lot on where you live and how your community is. And we live in a bit of a bubble here in Oak Park, but it's still true. Youth are less invested in sexual orientation and monosexuality. Okay, let's move on. I want to show you all a video about the science of being transgender. Let's take a listen.
There's a lot of misinformation out there about what it means to be transgender, but recently scientists have begun to look more closely into the neurology, physiology, and psychology behind it.
So today we're going to break down what science does know in a respectful and educational way. Hey guys, I'm Gigi Gorgeous, and today I'm here with ASAP Science to break down the science of being transgender. Before we get too deep into it, we have to look at your genetic sex, or the chromosomes you have. These were determined right at fertilization, when the sperm cell from your father, which carries an X or a Y chromosome, fused with the egg from your mother, which carries an X chromosome.
But until 6 or 7 weeks after fertilization, both XY and XX embryos have identical gonads. Around 7 weeks, the male sex organs start to develop because of a gene on the Y chromosome called SRY. It causes cells to become more specialized, and these cells create testosterone, which in turn triggers the development of structures like the penis and scrotum, while other cells block female development by degenerating the female ducts. However, in female development, because there is no Y chromosome with the SRY gene, these ducts stay intact and become the uterus, cervix, upper vagina, and the oviduct with the help of estrogen and chemicals secreted by the early kidney. But it's not always that simple. There are sometimes even rare combinations like XXY, XXX, XXYY, etc., and even people with XX chromosomes that develop male genitals and characteristics due to a piece of the Y chromosome breaking off and switching places to an X chromosome.
But sexual differentiation in the brain actually happens much later than gonadal differentiation. And yes, although controversial, male and female brains have structural and functional differences between each other. Studies have found that males generally have a larger cerebrum, cerebellum, and hippocampus, while females have higher density left frontal lobes and larger volumes in the right frontal lobes. So what exactly do we see when we look at the brain of a transgender person? Several studies have shown that transgender brains are both structurally and functionally more similar to their experienced gender identity than their biological sex.
One study found that trans women who, despite being assigned male at birth, had a smaller female-sized structure in the hypothalamus. MRI scans also show the brain structures of trans people to be more similar in thickness to their experienced gender and not their sex. Finally, the pheromone androstenedione causes different hypothalamic responses in male and female brains. And when individuals with gender dysphoria were exposed to it, the hypothalamic response matched their perceived gender rather than their sex. These studies help to highlight how masculinization or feminization of the gonads is not always the same as the brain, and that there's a difference between your sex or your anatomy and your gender or how we perceive our own bodies. There also seems to be a genetic component to transgender identity. Looking at family histories, gender identity incongruence seems to run in the family, meaning they may be inherited. The CYP17 gene, which controls the body's level of sex hormones, has a changed allele that is expressed frequently in trans men. Although more research could be done, scientists are currently looking at over 3 million DNA markers for transgender identity to investigate any genetic link for being trans.
So what's the point there? Just to re-emphasize what it did say. But the takeaway point, in my opinion, is body gender is different than brain gender and develops differently at a different point in time. And that's important to remember. So real quick, I don't want to get all wonky with this, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with the DSM. That's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the latest edition being the 5th edition, DSM-5. But you might want to know this. Let's look at a component of that diagnosis, which is gender dysphoria. Not a component of it, that is the diagnosis. What is gender dysphoria? Well, it's the distress that can accompany the incongruence between your experienced gender and your expressed gender or assigned gender. Not everybody's going to experience it, but if you are prevented from the desired physical interventions or even dressing a certain way, your chance of experiencing gender dysphoria goes up. And that is the diagnosis that you're going to be given. That's the label you're going to be given when you enter the mental health system. I'm not into labels. I don't think they're useful, but our world kind of requires them. So looking really quickly at gender dysphoria in children, what's important here is to understand, you can look these up online if you want to reread them, but it's that at least 6 of the following need to be present for at least 6 months. And it has to be associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in the major domains of your life. And then we have that same concept for adolescents and adults, but there are less requirements and only 2 are needed. But again, clinically significant distress. What matters here, I think, is what does it actually feel like? And so I want to introduce you to the social, emotional, and physical experience of being trans. I've got 2 examples. They're both videos. I think you'll find them both fascinating. We're going to start with the story from NPR Story Corps. Kaysen Ford and his mother, Jennifer. Let's listen to what Kaysen has to tell us.
It's Friday, and time again for StoryCorps. Today, a mother talks with one of her kids about an important life moment. Kaysen Ford is the youngest of 7 children. When he was 12 years old, Kaysen sat down at StoryCorps with his mother, Jennifer Sumner, to talk about life in elementary school in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a martial artist. I play the stand-up bass. I am learning how to play the guitar, and I am transgender.
What level are you in martial arts?
I'm a level 2 blue belt. That means I am halfway to black belt.
What is your favorite subject in school?
PE.
PE.
Or lunch.
What grade level were you in school when you decided to tell your friends and family that you're transgender?
It was around 5th grade when I told my friends and family I was transgender, because up until then I did not know that the word existed. It was misery every day. I hated being called a girl, I hated being called a daughter, but most everybody, my family, friends, they were just okay, because they kind of knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Over the summer, I went to art camp, and they did not know I was transgender. They just called me he, and that was awesome. I think the happiest moment in my life would probably be January 16th, 2015, 8:45 p.m. You bought me boxer pants.
You'd been telling me for quite a while that you wanted boxers. You were wearing all boy clothes, getting boy haircuts, and that was like the final change. And you were just ecstatic.
That was awesome.
Is there anything else you would like for people to know about you?
Well, even though I'm transgender, I'm a kid too. I have homework to deal with. I have tests to deal with.
I have been extremely proud of you because you have been true to who you are, and you're very courageous.
It shouldn't be scary to be who you are. I mean, maybe a little bit at first, but it's way happier this way. Trust me.
I don't think you realize what a leader you are. People look up to you because you are not afraid to take a different path. And we know that it's your life and you're the one that's got to live it. But we are there for you every single step of the way, and we're going to do whatever we can to lighten your load. I'm very proud to be your mom.
I'm proud to be your son.
That's a beautiful story of a son and a mom. And I think there's a lot of certainty in Kaysen. He doesn't seem oppositional or confused or delayed to me. I have another video I want to share with you all. Jamie Dodger is a bit of a YouTube star in the trans community. And he put together this amazing video of 5 years on testosterone, and then there's some surgical transition included in that as well. Let's listen and watch to his amazing story.
Hey, my name is Jamie. I'm just making a female to male intro video. I am pre-everything, but I'm out and living full-time as male. Hey, so I am officially on testosterone today. 25th of January 2012 is my T-Day, so I am so excited. I just did my first rubbing. Hey, so this is my 1 month on testosterone, and I've been getting spots, as you can see, just here and look round here. 2 months on TVO. I've had a definite voice drop in the last month. This is my 3 months on testosterone update. I think the first change that's quite noticeable is my voice. It's breaking as well, and my thigh hair is coming through quite nicely.
Today is my 4 months on testosterone. The hair on my arms has increased a lot, and my legs as well. It's starting to grow over my knees. 5 months on testosterone video. Hair on my face, and I have chin hairs. You can't really see them, but they are black and they're just along here, and I can definitely feel them, and I can see them in a magnifying shaving mirror. This is my 6 months on T video. This is my 8 months on T update. I think my voice is still dropping. So today I'm 3 weeks post-op, so I thought I'd make a quick video. This is my 10 months on T video. I guess I've made an attempt to do No Shave November purely because I haven't actually gone a whole month without shaving since I started T, so I thought it'd be quite interesting to see how much I could grow, and that turns out to be nothing except like a really straggly slug-like tash. Hey, it's Jamie, and this is my 1 year on T video. Can't believe it's been 1 year already. Hey, it's Jamie. I'm now 18 months on T. I have a little bit of chest hair. It's been a few months since I've made a T update. I think it's maybe closer to 4 now actually. The hair's really coming in on my chest now, and also facial hair, which is really cool. I've been waiting for that for 2 years, and it's finally coming in. I am around 3 years, 4 months on T now. So I'm now about 3 years, 9 months on T, and my facial hair is quite filled in. It's still filling in more now. I am now 4.5 years on T.
Hey, my name is Jamie. I'm just making a female to male intro video. I am pre-everything.
I am now so incredibly close to hitting 5 years on T, and I can't believe that 5 years is gone, and I can't believe how much I've changed in 5 years. It seemed completely unachievable and just so far away when I first started out in transitioning, and I just can't believe that I am where I am now. It's pretty cool.
Wow. I've seen this video many, many times, but it's still kind of amazing. Hormones and some surgery. So hey, let's get into the practical stuff for parents. What should you know, and what should you do, and what shouldn't you do? Well, one of the first things you should do is know that they is not plural when we're talking about language around gender. Have you noticed that your kids talk about a friend and they say they? And this isn't universal, but it certainly occurs way more than it ever did before. So let's get into some practical stuff. First, we should know that the risk factors are real. Again, to reinforce, out of almost 30,000 respondents, 39% reported serious psychological distress within the last month, and 40% attempted suicide in their lifetime, 7% in the last year. That's really dramatic, especially when it's compared to the numbers of the general US population. So there are very real risks here. It's very important to pay attention to this. And your role as parents is primary in that. So your kid says to you, hey, mom, dad, I'm trans. Or they might say all kinds of other things, but let's just assume that's what they say. Here are some of the reactions that you could have. And here are some of the reactions you should have. And there are only two. And one is extreme curiosity. You should get very curious to understand your child and what your child is trying to tell you. And secondarily, you should give them your full support without judgment. Because this, for them, is a reality. And they may not know, they likely don't know for sure. Some kids absolutely are certain, and some are not at all certain. And it's a scary, scary process, one filled with uncertainty. So be extremely curious and give them your full support. And what to do? Well, in general, you need to be gender affirming. Your environment have to reflect that. Figure out what it means to be gender affirming. Do your research. You need to handle language very, very carefully, because language is where the meaning is carried. And in the beginning of the process, that's all that kids have. So make sure you understand how to speak the language of your child. You must be patient, because you need to allow for change and you need to allow for variance over time. And that's going to test your patience. You need to destigmatize and normalize non-conforming gender expression over and over and over again. Even if you're not sure that it's right, even if it makes you uncomfortable, do not become the judge of what your child is experiencing. You remember that distress is not internal, it's external. Why? Because it's socially created, socially constructed. There are societies in which gender dysphoria doesn't exist because the society doesn't treat gender the way that we treat it. That is true historically and it's true currently. It's a socially created disease, and that is incredibly important to remember. So what's the role of therapy? Well, if these are kids, they might be shy, introverted, isolated, depressed, distrustful, good actors, reactive, compartmentalized. They might mistrust their own feelings. They could struggle to locate their core sense of self, and they could be shameful because they internalized the transphobia that our society constantly projects. So the core of the work in therapy is to help the person find, build, and express their authentic gendered self. So there's a coherent story, a coherent narrative. And that can happen in the presence of a compassionate and supportive other, a therapist. So they can express their self in the world with confidence and develop a stable identity. And if any of you were ever teenagers, you know that forming that identity is hard enough. If it includes gender, it's a big, big task. So what's the role of individual therapy? Well, the therapist's job is to determine if there's a clear and persistent awareness. So to explore with your kid their transgender identity or their thoughts about gender, because they may not be at that point yet. And then to further that process, not to force that process, but to allow it to be furthered, working with their client. You need to clarify, how is your kid experiencing their gender? They need to evaluate, are they ready for social or medical transition? They need to educate so they can learn as much, so you can learn as much as you can, and the rest of your family system can learn as well. They need to facilitate, to help your kid in the system transition, and they need to support. They need to be your access to support, emotional well-being without judgment. And just a note on this evaluation, therapists are not gatekeepers. They will write letters of support that are necessary for surgical interventions, but they're not gatekeepers. They are not the determiner. Don't go into therapy wanting them to make, to be the judge and to make a call. What's the role of family therapy? Well, really important to note here that for trans kids, family support is the primary protective factor. If you want to bend those statistics about depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and suicidal attempts, bend them with family support. It makes a massive difference. And the primary areas of work within the family system are acceptance, exploring the concepts, gaining insight, understanding, gaining empathy, disclosure, when and how do you tell the people in your life, the broader community, the impact it's going to have on relationships for your kid, for you, for your spouse, for your grandparents, for your cousins, for your friends, and for your community. And to give you access to support and resources. The water needs to flow downhill to you and your family to deal with this in the best way possible. So connections to other trans people, to support groups, to information, to financial support, moral support. And then to look at really current and future intimate relationships. This is especially important when we're talking about adults. And of course, finally, as well, as we talked about the readiness for medical transition. But the reason I mention this is because with minors, parental consent is necessary from both parents for medical interventions. And you as parents need to be in lockstep together on what you're doing. And if you're not, you need to head into therapy to make sure that you can get there. Because of the first bullet point, family support is the primary protective factor. So, hey, we're at the end of this whole thing. I want to bring it back to the personal, to my story. And I want to say a few things, and I'm going to read this because I want to get the words just right. This is a fairly recent picture of Eli with his friend. He's living in the city. He has a small but supportive friend group. He works as a shipping manager for a large corporation in a warehouse. And he's living his life as he sees fit. And his life is not without challenges, sometimes big challenges, and he still struggles in many ways, but he's living his authentic life. And I wish and I hope that he encounters a world in the future that is more accepting, less judgmental, and less biased about his gender identity and his gender expression. And I wish for all of you to be a part of that same for yours and others. So a final thought here is just some things that I think about, but we don't need to discuss this necessarily. But these are some of the concepts that I think about when I think about gender in America. So we, I think, have reached the end of this. I want to just make a note that I did actually put together a resource guide. It's got some recommended reading, and it has 3 pages of resource organizations in Chicago that you or someone you know could use. Thrive has got that posted to a link. I think they'll put that link up a little bit later. So there we are. I guess we're at questions, comments, and discussion, and I'm gonna stop my presentation at this point. Thanks for your attention. I appreciate it.
All right, Rick, let me come in here. There we go. Well, that was an absolutely incredible presentation, Rick. So much information, and realistically, it's understandable that this is just the beginning of this conversation. There's so much to cover, and there's so many feelings that go with this, and so many questions. There are a lot of questions that have come in. Let me just throw one out that was raised. When we were watching the video of Jamie, in the chat room, somebody had asked if Jamie had a penis, and somebody else in the participation said that that's really not an appropriate question, and wanted to know if you could speak to that. Follow-up questions were, what are questions to ask that are appropriate, and what are questions that you don't ask?
I think it's an easy question to answer. What would you say to a friend or an acquaintance? Would you ask them about their penis? Would you ask them specific questions about their penis? Would you ask them if they had a penis? I think you probably wouldn't. Why? Because it would be an intrusion of privacy. And so that's my opinion on it. There's obviously room for lots of opinion, but perhaps in a private setting, if you were talking to Jamie Dodger, Jamie, maybe if there was an openness, that could be a question that was asked.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that hopefully that's addressing that. I suppose that is interesting to begin to wonder about the kinds of questions. The other thing that I think has been brought up in the chat room is how much support that parents need. I know that I've worked with families as a family therapist myself whose children have transitioned, and there's they've experienced grief, the loss of that daughter or the loss of that son, and the kinds of support that there are for parents who possibly outwardly can show tremendous support for their child, but inside they are struggling. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to it very specifically. I mean, for Eli's mom and I, it was very challenging to stay aligned in dealing with this. It was a little bit different in that Eli was older, but it's very challenging. And I think parents need to take care of themselves, but they need to take care of their child as well. So working through your issues in your own therapy, doing it with your partner or spouse, to make sure that you're in alignment and can work with your child that way is critical. So I would say, if you're experiencing this, absolutely you should be attending therapy to explore what it means for you. Yes, there is loss, but I prefer to look at it as gain. I had a daughter and now I have a son. My daughter didn't go away. That is my memory and my experience of many years with Lena. I've gained a son.
Nice, Rick. You know, you sharing your personal story with people, I think, is so powerful. I mean, there are a number of people that are commenting on how much that sharing is meant to them. there are some specific questions, like somebody's asking about to talk more about non-binary, not in terms of transsexual, but non-binary. Is there some distinction there?
Well, you know, maybe one way to think about that is the concept of gender fluidity. We didn't really get into that. Another term that's used is gender queer. So what that can mean is fluidity means I identify in a fluid sort of way. I might identify male on Tuesday and female on Wednesday. That's challenging to deal with, right, as parents. But that is essentially the other is that non-binary could mean neither, really. I am not binary. I am they. And so what does that mean for somebody's sexuality? Well, it could mean all kinds of things. It could mean they're asexual, but it doesn't have to mean that. They just don't identify in one particular categorized way. And that's where the concept of gender as a spectrum with a slider is, I think, really a much more sophisticated way to think about it. I think we ourselves can even experience that.
Mm-hmm. Somebody asked a really interesting question. Once a child have transitioned, does the family still keep pictures around their house of the child before the transition?
Ask your kid, right? I mean, that's what matters. There can be trauma for, you know, to be misgendered. So is a family picture of your daughter who transitioned to male gender identity, is that misgendering? I think you need to be open to how that person is experiencing it, how they experience it. And that is the determiner. But I'd say it'd be best to err on the side of not doing that and asking.
I mean, I think what you're really talking about here is that communication within the family, and that there aren't necessarily set rules about that. It really is about how people are feeling about it within the family. Yeah.
Yes, but honoring the person who is attempting to make that transition or has made that transition to a gender identity, because the deck is stacked. The societal deck is stacked in the direction of binary, right? And of, oh, that's what you are. You can't change that. So you really, I think, have to unstack that deck. You have to err on the side of the person who's changing their gender identity.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick response. There's a question that is being asked that is already in the presentation. I think you said that gender identity begins 18 to 24 months. Is that right?
Yeah. Awareness of gender identity. Not all kids will necessarily report, but it's consistent that they can.
Yeah. Why do you think that there has been such more of a surge in transgender, queer, binary identity? You know, the social factors that are contributing to that? What are your thoughts?
If something is taboo and it's no longer taboo, there's an opening of it's okay. It's not accepted, but it's okay. Mm-hmm. I think then the door opens. Look what happened with the Supreme Court decision to legalize same-sex marriage. There were precedents to that, but the same-sex community did not anticipate that happening. sometimes change happens very rapidly, and at other times it's like watching ice melt, which is a bad joke in the age of climate change. But
yeah. Well, you're a funny guy, Rick. Let me ask you this. I know we're coming to an end here. Are there particular questions that you find people are always asking you? I guess distinguishing between a therapist, but also the father of a person who's transitioned.
no, I think actually my answer to that is it's a little upsetting that people aren't asking me questions. They're afraid to touch it. And that I wish wasn't that way. If I was going to leave a message for parents, you know what they say about sex, right? Talk to your kids about sex, because otherwise, they're not going to know, and they might get taken advantage of, or they might do things they shouldn't do, you believe. Well, talk to your kids about gender.
Yeah. Rick, the overwhelming response to this talk tonight is how helpful, informative, fantastic presentation. I'm just looking to see if there are any final questions that are being put into the chat here. I think we've covered most of the questions that were presented here. And I think what we'll do is just kind of wind it down at this point, unless you have any final thoughts, any final things you would like to say.
No, I mean, I really want to thank everybody for coming and listening. I am not unbiased. I have both my personal agenda and a professional agenda. That professional agenda is driven by my professional ethics, in that way, to be non-judgmental. But I think the folks that came tonight can have an impact on many, many people to begin a dialogue about this. And we need to be talking about this. I envision a future in which we won't be talking about what gender somebody is.
Right.
We won't be asking what their pronoun is. And today, what people can do is put your pronouns on your email signature, right? But I hope we get to a place fairly soon where we don't need to do that anymore.
Right. This is a terrific topic that one day when we can be in person again and to generate conversation and interaction and not try to, jam it into 1 hour. I know, Rick, that coming back and doing more of this presentation and continuing in these conversations is going to be extremely, extremely important for people to be able to do that. And maybe at Thrive, we can come up with some programming that might address that as well. There was one last piece I'm thinking. No, I guess I already addressed that one. So, I know. I wanted to say that it's really important to us for people to look into the chat room. We have a survey, and I think it'd be really important to get an idea of how people felt about tonight's talk. We also want to hear from you in the feedback as to other topics that you feel are extremely important for us to be having conversations about. This certainly is a primary example of important and relevant topics that we need to open up conversation about. So there are resources that are in the chat room. People have posted some books, and I know Rick has an incredible resource list that you can access through a link. That, and I just really want to thank everybody. We had a terrific turnout tonight. There was, well over 100 and maybe 130 people here tonight, and that's computer-wise. So please look into the chat room to get those links and resources. That would be terrific to know. And again, please let us know what other topics you'd like to hear about. Again, this has been recorded. It will be in the Thrive video library. And one last thing I just wanted to say, no, there were two last things I wanted to say. One is that our next talk is on February 24th, and it's going to be another very important topic, and it's let's talk about race. It's going to be furthering the conversation on race and racism. So please join us for that. And now for the pitch. Thrive presents these talks and other programs for free to the community. But like all nonprofits, we really do depend on the generosity of the community. And if you are able to make any donation to Thrive, please do so. You can contact anybody over at thrivecc.org to make that donation. So I really, and there's a link in the chat box in order to do that. That would be terrific and very, very helpful for us to keep these programs going. Rick, thanks so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for everybody for listening.
Oh, that's really great. So we'll say goodbye to people. You can just start returning to your normal evening. Rick, we'll hang on for a moment to just kind of debrief after people have left.
Will do.
Thank you, everybody.